Hi, I'm Celia Boothman, founder of LTR Coaching, and I'd like to welcome you to the Inspired Triathletes podcast, where I'll be bringing you stories from female triathletes and taking on topics that are important to women in the sport. Hello and welcome to today's episode. I'm here with Amanda Thebe, fitness coach and author of Menopocalypse, which is an awesome book. I love it. So we'll just start off with a little bit of your background, how you kind of got into this space, what got you into menopause and all its joys.
It was never on my bingo card. I'm telling you, nothing. I probably started a little. I know I'm older than you, but like when I always worked in like IT. I worked for Northern Electric, then I worked for IBM. So I had a full-time job, but I'd always been like an active kid. And when I finished like school and college, I decided I wanted to be an aerobics teacher. So I started doing all of the certifications for like being remember the RSAs, the RSA certifications
Oh, yeah, it's
on
vaguely.
Royal School of Arts. And so I did aerobics, and then I did a lot of like body pump, like step aerobics. I worked for Schwinn. I used to tour like Europe with Schwinn doing that spinning when it first came out. And then I decided to do personal training, and it was decades ago now. And it was with Loughborough University, which is the only place you could do it at the time. I mean, it's still an unregulated business, and it was a diploma through them. I used to go down once every weekend to do that. And so now I don't even think the course exists anymore, right? So, but then, like all of us in the fitness industry, we were just constantly curious. I think coaches tend to be curious people. So I've got tons of certifications in lots of, different elements. And so it was always like a passion for me. Just I was that fit, active, annoying kid turned into the fit, active, annoying adult. And then I moved from the UK, went to Boston to live for 2 years, then moved to Toronto, and I became a mum. And I couldn't work in my like career, my tech industry anymore. And so I started teaching like all the local mums at the school, like fitness, because otherwise they'd follow me around the gym going, "What are you doing? What are you doing?" And so I started doing fitness classes and had a very successful business. And then I moved to Texas for 4 years. And what happened is during the fitness business and me move into Texas, I went through perimenopause. And that's sort of where my menopause story starts because, after I've been doing this now, fitness and nutrition for what, 35 years, if I say I was 20 when I started. And never have I ever heard about menopause in the realm of fitness. And so 10 years ago or more, when I was about 42, I started to feel unwell, and it wasn't anything that made a ton of sense to me. And I was in Canada at the time, and I went to my doctor, who was very good, and I went into the medical system and was spinning my wheels for nearly 2 years, getting all different tests and diagnoses and things that all of the doctors were like, we're trying to help you. We can't work out what's wrong. Um, just keep doing what you're doing. And it was just really frustrating. I had more questions than answers, essentially. And then eventually at 44, went to a gynecologist who just said, you know what, this is perimenopause. I think you've got migraines with aura, because I'd had terrible vertigo as well. And I think you're struggling with depression. It's likely because of the hormones and situational, right? Because you're not living up to your potential. And he went, and I can help you. And I was like, what? Peri what? I'd never even heard of that.
Yeah.
Like, we're talking over 10 years ago now, and it
Yeah.
really is something that's in our lexicon now. But at the time, people weren't using that terminology. And so at first I was relieved, and I was like, okay, I don't have a brain tumor. And then I was really pissed off, and I was walking down the street kicking all the dustbins going, you fucking hell, I've had 2 years of this, and why didn't anybody tell me this? And I sort of used that like rage and frustration to sort of start talking about it. And that's really my story. And I created a Facebook group called Menopausing So Hard. I wrote a few articles that got traction. And then women were just like, that's me too. I recognize myself. And then I started writing a book about it, and teamed up with experts, because clearly I'm not a medical expert. and I didn't want to be one. And so I got those people in my back pocket and wrote a book that was evidence-based, that was factual, but wasn't clinical, so that like me and you could just talk about it in a really
Mm,
friendly way, almost like your best mate telling you about it. And
mm,
then what I did is I used all of my sort of subject matter expertise in fitness and nutrition to be able to then talk about solutions outside of pharmacology. Obviously, hormone therapy and other medications are available, but I wanted to speak about other stuff you could do that we know is fundamental. And even if it doesn't feel like it in the moment, we have data to show that it really is important, right? And so that's essentially where I've come from, and then everything's just evolved from there. None of it was planned at all.
mm. But yeah, it was sent to you as a this is your journey, this is where
This
you're
is my
going.
journey. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. It's interesting as well. You're talking about that coming from that athletic background or fitness background, and it is frustrating for a lot of women when they've been really active their whole life, and it sort of hits them, and they're like, "What is going on?" And they feel like they're doing all the right things. It's like we're told when you read normal menopause books or normal menopause articles, they tell you to exercise and eat healthily. And if you're doing a lot of that already, you can be like, why is this happening? And it's a normal process that your body goes through, isn't it?
It is right. And I think you've made a really great point there, because it almost feels like you're like, pissing up a hill sometimes when you're trying to say to people, nutrition and exercise, stress management, sleep quality, like mindset, how you talk about this process are really important. But it can almost feel a little bit condescending when, you sat on a sofa and you can barely move to get a cup of tea because you've got chronic fatigue and you've
Mm,
got depression and your joint ache. And so I think that the conversation has to be compassionate, and it has to see women where they are. And like
mm,
statistically, you know this, and I'm sure your listeners will know this. We've got about 75% of the population of women will experience some symptoms, between
mm,
5 and 7 symptoms, with 25% of those women having symptoms severe enough that it'll impact their quality of life. I feel like I definitely fit into that 25%. And actually, the idea of exercising and eating well weren't even accessible to me, even as a fitness
mm,
professional, even as an athletic woman. And so it's like, how do you sort of square that circle? Right?
mm,
We know the data. We know that potentially it might reduce your symptoms and it might make you feel better, but it might not as well, right? But we
mm,
do know that health outcomes are important. So even though you're in a perimenopause transition, that usually gets better for most women, and then we live the rest of our life post-menopause. The things you do today impact your life, how it will be as you move forward. So we need to promote health, positive actions, and we know what they are. But in the thick of it, when you're barely functioning,
mm,
how does that look? Well, I just think that that's when we can have a very valid conversation from a coaching standpoint. We're
mm,
coaches, and we can say, like, what's something that you can do today that might make you feel better than you do now? Right. And
mm,
so, like, for me, I really struggled with depression, which was very new to me. I've never had it in my life at all. And for me, that was like, okay, I don't think I can exercise today, but I'm going to go out for a walk and I'm going to do 15 minutes, and that's going to be my win. And I'm going to like pat myself on the back because I really don't want to do it. And it's a positive step forward. And
mm,
that's the type of health promoting activities we should be leaning into for menopausal women. And rather than sort of, I hate the language around it, like rather than succumb to things, it's almost like saying, I acknowledge what's happening. I'm not optimal, but there are some things that in my toolbox that I can access. And
mm,
it's down to even things like social connections. Like a lot of women feel very isolated and lonely through this stage and often retreat, thinking it's only me, I'm a failure, I'm such a
mm,
loser. I know I did. I remember looking at myself in the mirror going, who is this person looking at me? I don't even recognize myself. And it's a struggle for a lot of women. And so actually joining a community, listening to podcasts like this, where you've got other athletic women that are saying,
mm,
my 5K run's killing me. I'm doing it and then I'm dead for 4 days afterwards. Why?
Mm.
Well, maybe it's because your body's actually telling you that it's in a shit mood and it wants you not to do it
Yeah.
today. What else could you do?
Yeah.
Could you work on some biomechanics? Could you work on some mobility? Could you do some power walking? Could you do hill sprints? Something that's like going to be a quicker recovery type thing rather than
Mm.
like this long catabolic type endurance type stuff. And so, yeah, like it's a hard conversation to have. It's very individual, even though it's a shared experience. And I think you've got to really become the best detective for yourself, knowing what's out there, though, being educated. So that was a long
So
one. I always
it's
give long
no, no,
answers, by
that's
the way. I'm like,
no,
what?
that's okay. That's no, that's good. That's good. We get lots of information. Um, so I'm picking up two things I picked up from that, which I'd like to sort of talk about a little bit more. Is that the idea of being flexible, which we're not always, endurance athletes are not always very flexible, or they find that very challenging, and also mindset, and how we view ourselves and how we see ourselves as people. Those are two things that sort of stood out to me. I just want to say as well that today I've had a shitty day. I felt horrible, like woke up like, oh God, I don't want to talk to anyone. And I've
Yeah,
been out
proper
for a
grumpy
walk.
mood.
Yeah, just not happy at all. And I went out for a walk for I walked for like 11 miles just
What
to
the hell?
get
You really
up.
were stressed.
I know.
So you literally turned
It
into
was just
Forrest
like,
Gump today.
right, so I'm just gonna walk.
I've done the same myself, and to me, when you exercise or do any health promoting activities from the lifestyle intervention, they always should make you feel better. Nothing should ever make
Yeah.
you feel worse, right? So that's always something I think have at the forefront of your mind. And when I look at the conversation about being flexible, a
Mm,
lot of us are either B plus A leaning like personalities,
mm.
right? I always say B plus because that's how I did in school and it's my blood type too. And I'm not quite an A type personality, but unless you're very au fait with exercise science, nutrition science, all of the different interventions, it can be difficult to know what's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And I did this post on my Instagram and I pinned it to the top because I posted it just because I just thought, oh, I'll just remind people about this. And it went completely viral because people were like, oh, we're allowed to make our own decisions. We're
Mm,
allowed to choose what we want to do. And I called it structured flexibility because as human beings, we lean into being structured. We like routine. We like to know what's coming. Some of us like a little bit of a surprise, but we normally have some bedrocks along the way. And structured flexibility for me is when you wake up and you sort of determine on a scale to 10, how am I feeling today? Right? If you're feeling like you did, like a 3 to 4 in your energy level, well, then it
mm,
might be that you just need to move beyond your own and just like do something that makes you feel better. Like sometimes when you're in the 1 to 2 zone, it could even just be going outside and just taking some deep breaths and then moving along like I know I was like when I was in like a 5 to 6 energy range, it was like I think I can work out, but I don't think I can do a full workout. I want to go for a run, but I don't think I can do a full run. And it was almost like fitness snacking. Just do
mm,
something that's near what you want to do, and anything you do is considered a positive win. And usually, what I found is that when you did that, or you're in the 7 to 8 energy level range, that if you started it, you could usually finish it. Like,
mm.
or you could do more than you expected. And so, and then 9 to 10, carpe the fucking diem out of the day, go for it, like seize the
Yeah.
day. And I think that then people were just like, I'm allowed to start a workout and stop if it doesn't feel good. And I'm like, yes. Why
Mm.
would you think you couldn't? Well, because it's in my diary to do.
Yeah.
And
It's
I
on the
think
plan.
it's on the planet. And
Yeah.
often, we might start a week in perimenopause. I've seen this a lot with them people that I've coached. They might do a workout on a Monday because they're feeling quite good, and they might do like a cardio activity on the Tuesday, like a run or a bike ride, and then they're just exhausted for 3 or 4 days afterwards. And so use that as a barometer for how your body responds and say, I wonder whether something on the Tuesday was just too much, or I wonder whether doing things back to back was too much. Let's play around with that. Knowing that this is a temporary phase and it's not going to be how it is forever, And I might also add that, me being 55 now and 8 years post menopause, I don't need to have those type of strategies, not so much.
Okay.
Normally, if I've just had a cold or something, or, so I think that it's
Yeah.
also worth mentioning that things do get better for most women.
That's
Yeah.
good. That's good to hear because it does, when you're in the middle of that, it sort of feels like, oh, is this how it's going to be? And there's a bit of like grieving of loss of who you were and transitioning to something different and new, and you don't really know what that's going to look like. So it can be a quite confusing time
Like that's
for
your
people.
mindset then. That's
Yeah.
that's the mindset coaching. And so it's one of those conversations I think all of us who've had a hard perimenopause have had. And it's like, am I going to have to wake up and feel like this again? Is this
Mm,
what my life's going to be like? Where is the real me? Where have I gone? And it can be very challenging. And while I'm not an expert in mindset, I studied it and spoken to experts, and I definitely recommend that if anyone is feeling like that, then working with a psychologist can be wonderful. But
mm,
even just from a very like surface level standpoint, there's a couple of things that we can do to actually make positive strides forward, and that is how we talk to ourselves. Like, so managing our stress levels with breathing and exercise can all be really good, because when you're stressed you tend to feel worse about yourself. And then mindfulness is the method of bringing things to the present, so like having questions and thoughts that actually bring you completely to where you are now. Whereas depression tends to be something, when we look back, it's what we dwell on, and anxiety is anticipating the future, like not really knowing what's going to happen.
mm,
And that could be perceived or real, it doesn't matter, your body still responds the same way. And so mindfulness has a way of like just bringing that back to where you are right now. And what that does is it actually relieves you of all of the stuff that's causing you to feel very frustrated and unsure of yourself. Um, and I often do that because I always think that mindfulness is some type of a hippie way of like dealing with things. And it can be different for all of us. It can be yoga if you like that, but it could be going for a walk and just being very
mm,
present and listening to the birds and being appreciative of nature, sitting having a coffee without all the family screeching, "Mom, I've lost my socks," that type of
mm.
thing, like just having time to yourself. And then actually looking at your life and doing an inventory and saying, I have an opportunity now to decide what my life looks like moving forward, right? Things are changing. Change actually can be good. It doesn't always have to be bad. And for me, that was doing two things, and I can't really go into them too much here because they're like online psychological tools. But one is understanding what your strengths are, because we all have them. And so strengths are things like, what makes me tick? What are my key assets? And for me, mine was curiosity, which I thought was a bit
Mm.
lame. I was like, oh, that's so boring. And
That's
until
good.
I realized that curiosity was actually the method of finding out, what something is, digging deep and going down the rabbit hole and coming up and saying, I want to share this with you all. And so it's actually what makes me tick, and it's why where I am today is because I was like, no woman should have to question this, we should just know what it is. So
Mm,
driving through curiosity is one of my strengths, based on my values, and my values came up as things like my family and my friends and my health were my top values, and then work was fourth in the list, and I'm like, okay, so now I know that it's okay to be curious as long as it fits in with my current lifestyle where my family come first. I mean, I've been able to then say no to a lot of things really easily and have a very clear path forward. And just doing these things where I'm present and I'm very focused on what I'm doing has really changed my life in a way, and it took a lot of time to do, in a way that I wish all women could experience. And so I
mm,
do write about it in my book at a very high surface level, but if anybody's interested and really struggling and wants to learn more, then a psychologist can help you sort of with
mm.
it's called building a resilient mindset, and
Yeah.
it's really a really great tool for us. And women in now 50s and 60s are completely changing their lives. It's amazing. They're all of the fit people we're seeing it. 50, 60, 70 years
Yeah.
old that we never used to see. All of these women starting new businesses or going for executive roles in businesses. Just, it makes me so happy, right?
Yeah.
We're
Yeah.
usually being told that we're dead and done for, we're past our prime and all of those other tropes, right? And it's,
Mm.
yeah,
And that's kind of in the background there, isn't it? So that's why it's so important for us to figure out what it is that we're good at and bring that in and actually celebrate it and not, those be aware that those other voices are in there and that we can replace them with something else that's a little bit more positive. I think because otherwise sometimes you don't realize where that voice is coming from, that sort of subconscious societal
it's conditioned.
chatter.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're not always aware of it and you're like, why am I feeling, and it's because of that. So you have to kind of go in deep a little bit to find that and
That's
work out what it
brilliantly
is.
said. And it's like the expectation of me to be doing this is why I'm doing it, but does it fulfill me? Is it what I actually want to be doing? And it's asking yourself the hard questions. And yeah, it's really revealing actually.
Yeah, and I love what you said about, when you did your priorities and family, work came fairly low down. And sometimes you feel like, oh, society expects me to have, be work's the most important thing. And so we can kind of get lost in that as well, in that kind of, oh, I should
Exactly.
be putting that above that. This is more important. And actually, for me, my family is way more important, and that's my priority. But I always have this sneaky little feeling that it shouldn't
I
be.
should
It's
be
like
doing
that's
more. Yeah.
not, yeah, that's not the right way. That's not good, good enough. That kind of voices that come out and things. So,
I mean, I
yeah.
say this and acknowledge that I'm talking from a place of privilege, and not everybody has those type of options. And even if work is the most important thing for you, because you need to feed your family, and I obviously understand the social determinants of health, there's still ways that you can still fulfill other things in your life, that actually
Yeah.
prioritize yourself. And when I was writing the book, I read about a Stanford study that talked about a phenomena when women go through perimenopause of the we to me phenomena, whereas women, whether we're mothers or not, we tend to be nurturing for the most part, and so we will wake up and we'll be like, well, I have to do this for Johnny and this for
Mm.
Sarah and this for you know who, and you're always putting people first, and you drain yourself because you never look after yourself, and the oxytocin levels decline in our body as our sex hormones decline too, and that's the hormone that is created that bonds you. So when you breastfeed a baby, when you hug someone, and there's a slight decline in that, and they think that that's where women are able to step back and go, oh, maybe I might do something for myself. I might go get my nails done, and it can be anything. I never get my nails done, but what I might do is I might buy myself a nice perfume, or I might buy
Yeah.
some more stationery that I don't need. But that's my weakness.
I
But
like
but
that one.
but to me, how it actually played out was I was like, I'm going to see what it looks like to put myself first. Especially when I was in the thick of my symptoms. And I was living in Texas. It was beautiful weather. And I would get up half an hour early, get a coffee, and sit outside and listen to the geckos because it
Wow.
was like a tropical, and drink my coffee and just put myself first and just feel really good and just have no thoughts. If a thought came, I would acknowledge it, let it go. And it meant that I was just in a better place to deal with the just chaos of my own family.
Mm.
And they benefited from it. And nobody in my family ever said, oh, look how selfish mum is, like having a coffee on her own and not looking at us.
for,
You
for
know,
10
so
minutes,
so I
whatever.
yeah, I actually encourage women to sort of say, what could you do that actually does something for yourself? And know that
Mm.
it's not selfish, and it's actually just, it's part of self-care, which I mean has been bastardized, I know, but it actually is something nice that you can do for yourself.
Yeah, and also it helps the people around you as well to feel that they're helping you. It's kind of win-win, isn't it? Because you say, I
It's a
need some
win-win.
support here, and asking for support makes people feel needed and wanted, which can be really good for your relationship.
Well done. That's exactly it. Why don't we ever ask for help?
Mm,
Why don't we ever say, I can't do today. I need somebody else to unload the dishwasher. I
Yeah.
mean, my boys are lazy little bastards, and they're adult men now, and I've made them that way. And now I'm asking them to do stuff. They're just like, "What? You want me to
Yeah.
actually do things?"
I know.
Yeah,
Yeah, we do. I've got two boys, and they're forced to do drying up at night, and it's like
that's too funny.
they're not too bad actually. They're
How old
quite
are your
good.
boys?
I've got an 18-year-old who's at uni now, and a 15-year-old.
Yeah, mine aren't much. Mine are like 5 years just pushed along from there, the
Oh,
same kind of
okay.
age range. Yeah.
Yeah.
And actually, isn't it really lovely that all of a sudden our boys are almost adults and they want to talk to us and they're actually really fun to be around and then they
Yeah.
leave
They
us.
don't really want to talk to
Oh, they
me.
don't. Oh, well, they do. They do. Like the 18-year-old probably will, and then they've left.
Maybe.
It's like,
Yeah, no, he does. Yeah, a little bit. I mean, I try to speak to him on the phone now, but he's not great at talking on the phone. So we'll see. But yeah, it's nice. They're great. It's having them is great, and I love kind of bringing them up and trying to get them to do a bit of stuff around the house. But it's sometimes just like pulling teeth, isn't it? And you're like, oh, what?
I know. I imagine what it would be like to have like it might just the time of life we had children like later in our like 30s or whatever, and
Mm.
you then have girls that are going through puberty. I'm always interested listening to women's
Oh
stories
yeah,
about where we're going through a reverse puberty essentially.
yeah.
They're going through a puberty. That's a lot of hormones in
I
there.
know. Yeah, I've got a friend who's got a girl similar, and she's going through that, and her daughter's going through puberty, and it's like, oh God, it's quite nice to chat with her, and but they're very close. They get on really well, so it's nice because they can talk about all sorts of stuff. They talk about
And are you
everything.
finding that like actually introducing the conversation to teenagers is something that's helpful? I know my boys actually,
Mm,
obviously I wrote a book about menopause, so it's all over the
yeah,
place. And I've got two funny stories to tell you about that, but like they know what menopause is. And I think that when
yeah,
it comes time for them to have partners or nieces or friends, they'll be supportive, right?
yeah. I hope so. I do mention it. I sort of go, oh, it's my hormones. I'm doing, this is what's happening, and yeah. So they sort of know. I don't know how much they understand because I don't go into that much
You go into
detail.
how much details. Yeah, I mean, should you talk about it over the, dinner time, tea time? I mean, I do. But
Yeah,
I think that,
why
you
not?
know, yeah, it's like one of those things like how do you broach up? Well, you can't exactly sit with your fish fingers and chips and go, oh, my vagina's so dry today. It's not what I'm asking people to do, but if we normalize the word menopause and perimenopause,
Yeah.
then people, know enough. And what happened to me is two funny things. My oldest son was doing psychology, psychology at his senior school in Texas. And one of the questions was, does anybody know the phenomena that women go through between the ages of like 45 and 55 that can alter their brain and can cause depression and anxiety? And nobody knew. My son was like, oh, menopause.
No.
And the teacher was like, nobody's ever got that question right, but that was that one. And then the same kid who has like three friends total, was at the house, and his friend came round, and the front cover of my book is me like pulling the guns out, like looking strong. And his friend said, oh my God, your mum wrote a book. That's so cool. I didn't know that. And he picked it up and it opened on the page where it says, yeah, and because of my like dry vagina and lack of lubricant, I'm not having very much sex lately. And my son was like, oh my God, I had three many friends and now I've only got two. Thanks very much. And but no, but I did a TED talk or a TEDx talk, and it was called "Should Men Talk About Menopause?" And my answer is,
Mm,
well, yes. And
yeah.
I do a lot of workplace talks and educational advocacy work, and I always encourage men to come along because I know my husband was out on a limb, and most of us
Mm,
who are married to a man will be like, well, are never going to go through it. So how on earth are they supposed to be there and support us? And men want to fix everything, don't they? That's
yeah.
always and so it was the whole conversation about things aren't going like as normal, and you don't need to fix anything, but you need to be aware of what's going on. And when I ask you for help, you're going to give me it. And it's the open communication has changed, our marriage. Same-sex partners, I wonder how it would be if they're both going through menopause at the
Oh
same time.
wow.
That can't be much fun either.
No. No, I wouldn't have thought. I think that'd
Yeah.
be quite challenging. Maybe you sort of like one's up, one's down. I can collect that for a little bit or something.
You ride that
Those,
seesaw for a few years to
yeah,
get
or possibly. So you're a big advocate. Well, actually, no, I want to talk about swimming first. So we discussed your learning of swimming very briefly. At the age of 50, was it? You decided you were going to learn to swim? Because we're talking to triathletes here. I want to sort of go into that and what sort of kind of made you decide that you wanted to learn to swim and how did it go?
Yeah, it's a really fun story. And, can I just start by saying it's the achievement that I'm most proud of in my
Oh,
life? Because, and I'm speaking to an athletic community here, and I've always been athletic. I was that kid that you needed to give something to do because I was annoying with my energy levels. So I did karate. I'd got my like second Q near black belt in that, and then I did all my fitness stuff. And every time I learned how to swim, I just couldn't do it. And I'd do like one length in the pool and I'd be just knackered. So then I'd do breaststroke in between. And so I was never going to drown, but I just was never very good. And I relocated to Texas during Trump's first administration with my family. And they have all outdoor pools there and they're beautiful. And I had a
mm,
pool down the road from where I lived. And I used to just go to cool down because it's very hot there. And anyway, when we got COVID for the first time in like 2020, I caught COVID straight away. It was a nightmare. I was so frustrated, and there was no testing, and nobody knew what to do. And Texas was just free and open. There was no
mm,
rules or restrictions, and that shouldn't surprise you. But and anyway, I got COVID, and it took about 4 or 5 weeks for the main symptoms to go. But then I was stuck with long COVID, and it was a nightmare. And I had it for about 6 months and
mm,
nobody knew what it was. And I was in one of the top clinics, and they were just saying it's the virus. It's like post-viral fatigue. You're not getting out your system. And now we're talking about it a lot, right?
mm,
And going for a walk was just horrendous. I would go for a 10-minute walk, then have to sit down on the curb and be puffing and
mm.
panting. It was dreadful. And I'd been
Oh,
running like 10K like every other day and strength training. I was really the fittest I'd ever been.
yeah.
So then I thought, what would I be able to do? And I thought, like, breathing exercises would be super helpful. So every day I started doing breathing exercises to try and just improve my lung capacity. And then I thought, you know what, swimming. Swimming's a good way to
Mm,
improve breathing. So I started doing like one length and then breaststroke, and then the next time I'd do two lengths. And so I just was building it up a little bit. And then I thought, oh, I remember reading a book from Tim Ferriss, The 4 Hour Body. Do you remember that way back in the day?
I can't remember. I know his name.
And it was
I don't
like
know if I
the,
read
the
it.
quickest way to do anything, like the quickest way to be better at sex, the quickest way to be better at running a mile, the quickest way to lose weight. And I remember reading the quickest way to learn how to swim a mile. And I think a lot of his stuff is shit, actually.
Mm.
But this one used a method called oh, I forget what it was called now. Anyway, it was like effortless swimming or something like that. And it
Okay.
broke it down into four components. And the four components were learning to float, learning to breathe, learning to like enter the water, and then learning how to not kick as much.
Mm,
Right? Because I was like overworking.
yeah.
And I think that's essentially what I learned was I just was trying too hard. And within a 10-week period, I'd learned to swim a mile. Right? I just
Wow.
learned to swim. I just was like, I was doing it all wrong. And the cute part of the story is I never told my husband, and my husband's a competitive swimmer and an endurance swimmer. He swam
Okay.
Alcatraz, he swam the circumference of Key West, he won that.
Wow.
He swam across the ocean at Newfoundland and won that, broke records, like really good swimmer. He's
Mm.
Scottish and they held records in their family. And he's been trying to teach me for 20 years and he couldn't. So I didn't tell him I was learning. And then we went to the pool together and he said, oh, you just do your thing. And then I swam a mile and he was like, what just happened and how did that happen? And then so then he took me under his wing and he introduced me to lake swimming. And in Texas you don't need a wetsuit, right? So and he's very white because he's from Scotland. So I just swam normally and followed his white body. He actually had to tie his legs together because he's twice as fast as me, like to slow
Oh
down.
yeah, to slow himself.
And then we moved back to Toronto and we swim in Lake Ontario. There's a team called the Lost Team, which is Lake Ontario swim team. And it's one of the Great Lakes and it's huge. Obviously, it looks like an ocean, but it's weird because there's obviously no salt in it. But it can get very cold and the lake effect,
Yeah.
it brings cold water in and then warm water in, you never know. So I swim in a wetsuit there And yeah, now I'm comfortably swimming 2 to 3K. I get a bit bored actually after that. I'm not
Mm,
very fast. I've got probably really rubbish form, but I swim and I enjoy it. And so yeah, so
mm.
now I'm a swimmer and I love to be able
Oh,
to say that I'm a swimmer. So yeah. And I'm looking at the picture behind you and I'm like, okay, when I come to
that's
Wales
that's
next month,
North Wales, yeah.
yeah, I'll come into I've climbed Snowdon a couple of times. And I can see the mountain. Is that the Brecon Beacons or is that?
That's in Snowdonia, the mountains behind me. And that's near Brannan, the lake. I can't remember what lake it is that, but it's quite cold.
Yeah, and I've never really, actually, I have done two races, but it's within the club that I do.
Mm.
It's just called the Lost Mile. There's a 3K race as well, but I just do the Lost Mile, and I came back the third woman in my age group.
Oh,
And I thought that
amazing.
wasn't too bad because the swim clubs I go to are everyone's older. It's a really great activity for anybody, any age, right?
Mm,
And there's one woman that goes who's 85 and she doesn't go in the water without her red lipstick on. And I'm like, okay, you're the one that
nice.
inspires me to keep coming. And I love
Yeah.
that. It makes me so happy.
Yeah, I think that with swimming's that's what I like about, doing triathlon training is there's always something you can pick almost. Not always, but most of the time you can go,
Yeah.
I'm not feeling so great today. Swimming is great when you're feeling a bit tired and,
Yeah.
I don't always want to get in the water, but when
Well,
I'm in, I usually
you
feel
can take
okay.
that down. You can take, and
Yeah.
your heart rate doesn't tend to get as high in swimming as it does
No.
with running and bikes in the middle somewhere, right? So,
Yeah, it's much more low impact, so it's a lot easier and you can use it almost like a recovery session if you're not feeling great. So
yeah.
I quite often used to do that when I was training hard. Um,
I've never done a triathlon.
I
I've
was going to
done
ask you that. Did
Yeah,
you
I've
ever
done
do
two
it?
team triathlons, and it was only because the people who were doing it were like, "Yeah, I'm not very good at running, or I can't be bothered to bike," and I just jumped in and did it. And she didn't bring a bike, and so we had to do a BMX. Can you imagine me doing the triathlon on a BMX? It was the hardest thing I've ever
That's
done.
funny.
And then I've done some duathlons. And then
Okay.
they do a few events here that are like swim runs, and I don't know
Yeah,
what they're actually called, where you swim, you run, you jump back in the water, and you
I
do
know
it
what you
three or four
mean, but I
times.
can't. I think they are called swim runs. I think
What
that's the
is something name?
Otillo. There's the name. There's an
Maybe.
Otillo series, I think, but I don't know whether that's.
That appeals to me because I do cycle for leisure just to get around Toronto, but I don't
Mm,
cycle. But I mean, I probably have the time and the effort to be able to do that, when
yeah.
when the snow goes. But yeah, so I always admire people that do triathlons. I've got a lot of fast twitch fibers. I'm very much built to be strong. I'm quite a strong
Mm.
person for my age and I can do more push-ups than my kids and stuff like that. Like I am a strong person, and so I lean towards that and I still lean towards martial arts because I
Mm.
find that like suits my body type. Running, I'm a very good runner up to about 5K, and then the 8 to 10 is hard for me. So I don't like the long distances, but
Yeah,
I think it's good for me to sort of push myself a bit. Yeah.
yeah, definitely. And triathlon is like, even if you do just a sprint triathlon, it's still an endurance event. It's still
Yeah,
quite a
when
long
I look
way.
at sprint, I'm like, really? It's going to take me like 4 hours or whatever? I don't think so. I don't know how long it takes, but it's a lot more than I usually do. I look for the minimum
Yeah,
effective dose in everything I do. What's
yeah.
the best can I get from my body in the least amount of time? That's how I always think
Mm.
about everything. Yeah.
Yeah, but I think, as in triathlon, we need to be doing that as well. Like I always encourage, let's train smarter rather than just doing endless miles, because, you do need strength, you do need muscular endurance, and you can't just do that if you're just going out easy and slow and for longer and longer distances all the time. You need a mix of strength stuff in there as well, which
And
kind of
you think
brings me
that
on to,
yeah,
go on.
it attracts people our age as well, right?
Mm,
The triathlons seem to be women in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and it seems to be. And I actually read some study by Nick Tiller, who is one of my favorite exercise scientists, and he's debunked or has said that there's a few papers that debunk the fact that women are actually better at endurance than men. There was always
right,
that. It's
yeah.
really that there's not a ton of difference. It's just a myth that's been going around, but I do see the participation has changed. And I
Yeah.
really like that there's more women in it, but it does worry me that there's a lot of people doing triathlons and not doing strength training when we know that
Mm.
our risk increases and stress fractures are becoming more and more common in women after menopause. And so if we can encourage women to continue what they're doing, but just to really focus on some strength, sport specific strength work, it would be beneficial for their bone health and keeping
Yeah.
hanging on to lean mass as much as possible.
Yeah, that was gonna be my next question, was about strength training and how we fit it in, because it can be a bit of a barrier for some women and,
Yeah.
getting in the gym. So how do you encourage people to get started with strength training, and what to do, what kind of things do you
Yeah, well, I
encourage
mean,
people to do?
you don't have to go to the gym, and I think that's the first thing
Yeah,
we
that's true.
get rid of. Well, I think it's important to say because even for women who are athletic, it can feel intimidating going into a
Mm,
setting that you're just not used to, right? As intimidating it is for a gym person to go into the open water, right? Like it's
yeah.
sort of the same type of thing. And so, I mean, there's tons you can do at home now, and there's tons you can do with just some kettlebells and dumbbells. And I have a 12-week workout in my book, and you don't need to do a lot. You just really need to train smart. It's the same thing. Like you can do a strength workout that's actually going to be beneficial and help create a stimulus for increasing bone health and maintaining muscle mass with about 30 minutes, I mean, or
Mm,
less. And the recommended sort of dosage from the government guidelines is 2 times a week at 30 minutes.
mm,
I personally think it should be more, but if you've been like logical about your training schedule, and triathletes have the probably the hardest training schedule to fit in, I would suggest you do at least 30 minutes a week, or do the fitness snacking, which I'm a huge fan of, where you can do 15 minutes every other day.
mm,
And if you're doing more days, you could split between upper body and lower body and then do maybe two full body workouts. Or if you're doing twice a week, just do two full body workouts. But work on compounded movements, which is, functional movements that go through many joints. Like a squat is a really good example of that. Your upper body strength is as important as your lower body strength. All the power comes from your core, and your core is your front and your back, and it's the trunk, and we would
mm,
call it the trunk. When you have a functional trunk, it means that you move better through your joints. And so stuff like anti-rotation, and that's like resisting force when you're
okay.
moving sort of cross in a cross plane manner, it can be very helpful, especially if you're a swimmer. Not so much when you're on a bike and you're static, that's more
Mm,
isometric, right? But when you're running, it's cross patterning the whole time. It's opposite arm to leg. There's not
mm,
many of us run same arm, same leg. I think that's almost impossible. And so, but what we know is our risk of osteoporosis increases after menopause, and in that first 10 years, it increases to 1 in 2 people having
mm,
fractures. Now, a small fracture doesn't make a ton of difference, but if you're prone to fracture, then you need to be really proactive. And that means starting in your 30s and 40s with your strength training. I interviewed somebody that might be interesting to your community. I had a podcast, which I don't do anymore, and Leslie Patterson, and she is a
oh
triathlete.
yeah, she's on my list. Yeah,
All right. Well, I
I,
should get you
yeah,
connected. And
yeah.
Leslie,
I have spoke to her. She's meant to be coming on,
well,
but
she's Scottish, right? She
yeah,
loves she loves promoting
yeah,
triathlon training in the UK. And her story is phenomenal, how she broke her shoulder and
mm,
still finished first in her race because she had to raise money to keep the rights for a movie, the All Quiet on the
right,
Western Front. She
yeah,
was
yeah,
about to lose the rights to be able to make it, and she needed to raise $10,000. And so she did it by winning one of the Xterra races. And she broke her arm, and because of this she's an amazing athlete anyway, but just
mm,
because she is so specific in her training, she was doing lots of one arm drills. Right. And
mm,
she was learning to cycle with one arm, like individual arms and stuff. So she actually didn't do bad on the swim. She caught up on the bike and she beat everyone on the running with one arm working. It was incredible. Like it's different to like our type of level of athleticism, but it just
mm,
sort of, and she does strength training too. And it's just
yeah,
the way that the body can adapt. And so you will see within 12 weeks of starting a strength training program, actual improvements
Mm.
really, really quickly. You get the newbie gains, right? You get to see the quick gains. People like me who've been doing it forever have to work extra hard because
Yeah.
it's harder to come back, so.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I do recommend it for everybody, and I give various options depending on what people have got available to them. So there's not like a one size fits all for strength training.
And
I
there's
think that's the
tons
other
and
thing.
tons of free resources if you didn't know where to start.
Mm,
Just Google 10-minute strength training, upper
yeah.
body, lower body, full body. There's loads. So many I can't even begin to. So, or if you've got the financial means, it can be handy to like work with a trainer as well,
Yeah.
even just 2 or 3 times so that they can do an assessment on you, identify any maybe weaknesses there that a lot of times we need to do unilateral work. A lot of people have like, weak glutes and any of those stabilizer muscles. When you're working in a sagittal plane all the time, which you tend to be when you're running and on a bike,
Mm,
you tend not to have those transverse plane muscles very strong, and that's all like the serratus and the glute med and all of the things that stop you falling over and protect
yeah.
you. And so
Definitely.
yeah, so I think that that can be something that can be really helpful. Otherwise, just start doing something, and all of a sudden you'll just realize that you're feeling stronger, and you'll get
Mm,
curious hopefully and want to do more.
yeah, definitely. Yeah. No, that's good advice for people. And so nutrition obviously is quite important for endurance athletes and women going through this transition. What's your take on fasting and all these kind of trends and that we see for women advertised everywhere?
Yeah, I mean, you've probably got your own thoughts on this. And, as far as I'm concerned, like, so my background is I'm not a dietitian, but I've got a precision nutrition
Oh
certifications, which is
yeah, I know.
industry
Yeah.
standard. I think you've got like BTN over there and a couple of others that are a good and Mac nutrition. It's sort of similar, like industry standard. I got that about 15 years ago, and I've just honestly just kept up to date with all of like the research. So I feel like I can speak on this with a decent amount of authority. And you know, um, fasting isn't for everyone. I just think it's really easy to sort of dismiss intermittent fasting if you like eating breakfast. I mean, so I
Okay.
think it really depends. Like if you're a woman that has to train at like
Mm,
5 and 6 o'clock in the morning because that's the only time you've got free, you might not want to eat in the morning, and your body might
mm,
just adapt to fasted training very well. Or you might want a banana or a bit of peanut butter. I don't know. Like you might just want something on your stomach. Some women wake up and they're just not hungry till like perimenopause messes with your gut as well. Like you
mm,
wake up just feeling like a bit sickly or not hungry, and you don't want to eat till 11 o'clock. So I definitely would say to women, work within what your schedule is and what your personal preference is. But intermittent fasting isn't superior in any way from an
mm,
exercise standpoint and from a nutritional standpoint. Because what you can achieve from just a calorie deficit, as far as like improving outcomes for weight loss and autophagy and all of the different things that people shout out because of intermittent fasting, can be achieved in the same way with a calorie restricted diet. And most people intermittent fast because they want to lose weight and for no other reason.
mm,
And if
mm,
you potentially are going to lose weight because you're only eating in 6 hours instead of a 10-hour period, right? There's only so much
yeah.
food you can eat. So if it works for you, fine. It's not superior in any studies at all when you're looking at like placebo effect and randomized controlled studies. Fad diets simply are fad diets, and if it
Mm,
works for you, fine. But like just because Janet down the street lost 30 pounds on keto doesn't mean you have to completely get rid of all of your carbohydrates and protein. It just doesn't make sense. And
mm,
actually, there's been poor outcomes for ketogenic diets when it comes to like things like gallbladder and cholesterol raising and stuff, right? So my principles are, we know what nutrition science tells us. We know we've got three macronutrients. We know that our body uses all three for different things. A balanced plate should definitely contain carbohydrates. It's our preferred
mm.
fuel source. And not all carbohydrates are created equal, of course.
No.
right? So, eat as many complex carbs as you can, loading up on veggies, fruits, and then grains, etc., down to simple carbohydrates. And then know that carbohydrates, despite what everyone tells you about them being bad for you,
Mm,
usually are really good. Like complex carbohydrates are good for your gut health. Fiber is so important to us, especially as we get older.
yeah.
It's good for keeping our cholesterol in check, as well as that with the resistant starches. And it crosses the blood-brain barrier. And that's really interesting to know, because we get really fatigued in perimenopause and it doesn't make a ton of sense. But we know that estrogen levels decline in the brain, which is our prime area for energy production. And so getting glucose into the brain can be super helpful when you're really, really tired. Protein increases as we get older. It accelerates through perimenopause because we know that our lean mass starts to decline and our fat gains start to increase just because
Mm,
of the hormonal shifts. And so we need to do everything we can to hold on to as much lean mass as we can.
yeah.
And you're going to do that with the stimulus of the amino acids from the protein, right? So I always just say to women, look for about 100 grams of protein a day. Don't kick yourself if you only get 70. Don't be too smug if you get 120. Who cares? Just look for protein, because
Mm,
it changes for everybody, right? And I think that most people don't eat enough. And if you look for protein, you'll probably get in more in your diet than you used to, right? I'm very
mm,
flexible with food because I think food freedom is something that we all should aim towards.
yeah.
Fats are very easy to me because we eat enough fat usually in our foods. They contain a lot of fat and we cook with them. So usually looking for additional fats isn't normally necessary, but if you need some, take an omega-3. But even then, there's scientists out there saying you don't need it, right? You just don't
Mm,
need it if you've got a good smorgasbord of fats in your diet, and limit the amount of saturated fat because it's still associated with cardiovascular disease. And then the ultra processed foods are yummy. They're the best foods to eat in the world ever. They taste good, they make us feel good, but they shouldn't be the lion's share of your diet, right?
mm,
I always try and plan for them, eat them minimally, and respect the fact that they're sort of like a fun carb, even though they're also fats and sugars. That's
mm,
sort of my attitude to eating, and I really try and focus more on the why are you eating it, how do you feel when you
mm,
eat it, and what are the signals your body's sharing with you, right? Are you hungry? Should you be eating? Have you just exercised? Do you need to refuel? It's like really important questions that I think get lost in the I have to eat 30 grams of protein and I can only have spinach that's been cooked down and I have to have, oh, it just drives me crazy. Just
yeah, yeah.
eat the food.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. Yeah. It's like trying to make it simple and not such a minefield and stress
Practical.
area for people, really, because it can be very stressful. I mean, I do recommend eating a little bit before workouts if you can, but it doesn't have to be loads, you know. I think
Yeah.
sometimes people think they've got to eat lots of stuff before they
I
work
personally
out.
cannot work out unless I've eaten, and it's usually
Yeah,
just a
me,
banana and a
neither.
spoonful of yogurt or something.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it doesn't have to be loads. And then the protein is another thing that I'm like, try and do that, but you know, we can't always do it. It's
But
not
if we're
always
building
practical.
habits for women, if we're looking for behavioral change, which is
Mm,
honestly the best way to make change in diets, it's like protein's one of the first things I say. If you're not
mm,
eating enough protein, pick one meal a day and start always eating protein at that
yeah,
meal. And then when you've nailed that after 3 or 4 weeks, let's start doing your evening meal.
yeah,
Let's just train ourselves to do
yeah,
this in a very stress-free way. And knowing as well that women in through the perimenopause phase, which is very similar to the puberty phase, is start to have more disordered eating, more body dysmorphia. And so if we're dealing with a playing field that's already wrought with these type of like avenues, I think we need to be very careful about how we talk about food with women.
yeah,
And athletes are some of the worst for being hyper vigilant on food,
mm,
right?
yeah,
So let's try
definitely.
and add a little bit of like pragmatic approach to fitness.
Mm. And also what you say about, you know, gradually, you know, people sometimes expect everything to change overnight. Oh, I'm going to change all this stuff and it's all going to happen. And it's too much. You can't do that. You have to do it gradually over the course of weeks, you know, months. It can take a long time to reprogram and establish a new habit.
track
But
it and
yeah.
keep an eye on it, see if it's how successful you are. Most people
Mm,
aren't successful. There's like I think it's
yeah.
like a 2190 rule when it comes to habits. It's like most
Right.
habits need at least 21 days and
Yeah.
normally take 90 days to be completely set. So know that these things take time, and yeah, just work on small things that you think you're going to be successful on too, because
Yeah.
that is something that you're likely to be able to do, right? So, and we all go through these things as well. And it's like flossing, isn't it? You do it for a
Mm,
while and then you stop and you go like, oh, I'm doing it. I'm going to do it now.
yeah.
Well, I don't know if they do it in the Brits, but now I'm in Canada, I floss because I'm always in trouble for not
Yeah.
doing it.
I know. Occasionally. Yeah, it's like I learned to, I was trying to do something with my brain elasticity, and it was like, try and brush your teeth with your left hand
The
instead. And
neuroplasticity,
yeah, that's
retraining
right.
the brain. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so I was doing it, and every time I'd go to pick up my toothbrush with my right hand, now I go with my left hand. Now I'm like, oh, now I'm in the habit of doing it like that. Now I need to change. So I'm trying to do
Now you
different
need to,
sections
yeah,
first and
ambidextrous.
things.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like just weird things that you do.
I know it.
Anyway,
Well, and there's to me things like that are like no harm habits as well.
yeah,
Like it's fun and it might have some benefits to it. Like
yeah,
neuroplasticity has been studied, and it's like retraining the brain.
mm,
Actually going back to mindfulness, there's tons of data on mindfulness actually changing the structure and shape of the brain. They can see on MRI scans. It's quite amazing how you
wow,
can, and through perimenopause and menopause, we know that the brain changes structure and shape because it starts to turn off neural pathways that we don't need any longer for reproduction. I mean, it can
mm,
feel like we're losing our mind and we may be getting like Alzheimer's and all of these different things, but the studies also show that the brain rebounds and regrows and forms new neural pathways. And so I think it's really interesting how adaptable the brain is throughout our lifespan.
definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. I just looking at the time now, and I know you've got a flight to catch, although it's been delayed, but
It's
it
been
just
delayed. I'm heading off to San Francisco to visit Jen Gunter. We're going to go and hiking. So
oh,
that's my
cool.
that's my weekend planned.
Oh, that sounds lovely. Yeah, so just finally, obviously, we'll recommend your book, Menopocalypse, but is there anything else that you'd like to recommend to
At the
athletes,
moment.
female athletes? That,
Personally, no, not at the moment. I mean, you can always find me on Instagram.
yeah,
I've actually taken a digital detox at the moment and probably will come back in March.
okay.
But I try and post things that are fun, relevant, new data that we have as much as humanly possible. I find that for menopause, because it's the new cash cow, that
Yeah.
like I'm having to filter through a lot of garbage, and so I'm okay calling out the garbage as well.
Mm.
They see us coming, right? They go like ka-ching, ka-ching, and so I'm really happy to sort of do a bit of debunking when necessary as well. So that's just Amanda.Thebe on Instagram.
Yeah, that's really, I would definitely recommend that to people because you do sift through all of that stuff and you present a very sort of straightforward, no shit, this is how it is. And that's what I love about
My
your
mum's always
page.
telling me off. She said, "Did you need to swear?" And I'm like, "Oh God." I still get in trouble.
Oh, bless her.
I know.
Oh God. Okay, well, yeah, so thank you very much. I hope you have a good flight when you manage to get on the
When I managed to get to
plane.
it,
Yeah.
yeah.
And a lovely weekend. Thanks for joining me and yeah, take care. Thanks for listening today. Have a great day. Take care. Bye for now.